Good afternoon, everyone. This is Sean Huddy from CERIAS. I manage our strategic partnership program. And with me is David Stracuzzi. David is the manager of the machine intelligence. Pardon me while I put my glasses on. David is the manager of the Machine Intelligence and Visualization Department at Sandia National Labs in sunny Albuquerque, New Mexico. That lab conducts cutting-edge research in machine learning and artificial intelligence for national security applications, including the advanced visualization of data and results. David has been studying machine learning in the broader context of artificial intelligence for over 15 years. His research focuses on applying machine learning methods to a wide variety of domains with an emphasis on estimating the uncertainty in model predictions to support decision making. He also leads the Trusted AI Strategic Initiative at Sandia, which seeks to develop fundamental insights into AI algorithms, their performance and reliability, and how people use them in national security contexts. Prior to joining Sandia, David spent 3 years as a research faculty at Arizona State University and 1 year as postdoc at Stanford University developing intelligent agent architectures. He received his doctorate in 2006 and MS in 2002 from the University of Massachusetts at Amherst for his work in machine learning, and his Bachelor of Science from Clarkson University in 1998. And I'm going to hand it over to you, David, and welcome. Oh, and if anybody has any questions, please use the Q&A.
Thank you. I didn't realize you were going to read all that. I would have written it shorter. Okay. So thank you all for coming. So today I'm going to be talking about defining trusted artificial intelligence for the national security space. AI has been and is increasingly a disruptive tool that we're seeing across all sorts of applications and problem spaces. It's changed the way really the whole world operates, right? And as the years go by, that pace is only going to increase. The challenge is that we have to understand and we need to be able to rely on these AI-based models. And we don't always fully understand how they work. We don't always fully understand when they will work. And in the national security space, that causes some real challenges for us, right? When we talk about applications that have high consequences, which I'll try to give some examples as we go, right? It's not a great, comfortable feeling to be a little unsure about, is this going to work on this particular case or not? So we're going to talk a lot about how we get to trusted AI. And I want to be very clear up front, right? The point here is not that we have all the solutions. It's that this is a huge research space with lots of potential. All you graduate students out there, right? You should be listening for your dissertation topics here. But there's just a ton of work to be done. For those of you not familiar with the national labs, we conduct research, typically for the government, for a broad range of science and engineering topics. So all kinds of, so we have mechanical engineers, electrical engineers, civil engineers. If there's an engineer after your topic, we probably have it at the labs. We also have a number of scientists, so material scientists, biologists. We even have some neuroscientists. We have people who have expertise in a broad range of topics, chemistry, the list kind of goes on. So I will try to fill in some of the details there as we go. So why do we need trusted artificial intelligence? So as I said, the national labs focus on national security applications, which generally means there is some kind of a consequence associated with making bad decisions or not following the right set of policies, those sorts of things. If we're using AI to support us, to better understand the world, to better understand aspects of science, to better understand how engineered systems work, or to make predictions about when they will work and won't work, there's a cost to getting that wrong, and so we need to be able to rely on these models. And figuring out how we rely on those models is actually a huge problem, right? AI has been around for some time, but it's only just now reaching the point where it's getting applied to almost anything you can think of. And so the role of the national labs is to try to strike a balance between, yes, we can use AI to improve the way we solve certain types of problems or address certain types of open questions, but we need to use that technology responsibly, and we need to have some confidence that it's going to work. So just a quick scoping bit here. So we've had this internal investment in trusted AI for about 4 years now. We've been spending internally about $5 million a year from 2021 through 2025. So we are just now getting to the point where we're picking sort of the last round of projects that are going to start up next year. The goal here is to try to better understand and characterize the mechanisms of AI, the algorithms, the models that they create. And really what we're trying to do is bridge the gaps between academic work and the kinds of applications that we deploy at the labs. So it's really about a series of mostly fundamental R&D projects. We're trying to lay mathematical foundations, algorithmic foundations, so that we can use these things for a variety of different scientific and national security applications. And I'll say a little bit more about what that means in just a second. Okay, so the scope of Trusted AI, this program that we've been running, is heavily informed by our mission needs. So we're a little different from industry and a little different from academia. So places like Google and Facebook do huge amounts of AI research. That said, they don't address the same kinds of problems that we have. And the same thing with academia, right? There's a huge amount of AI-based research happening in academia, but the kinds of problems they tend to look at look a little different from the ones that we see in the national labs. So high consequence applications, right, when there's a penalty sort of for getting it wrong, generally require these well-characterized models and predictions. In other words, we need to really understand under what conditions do these models work, under what conditions don't they work. We need to have a good feel for the quality of the predictions that are coming out of them. Lots of our applications have sparse and incomplete data. That's actually a core to a lot of the work that we do. We usually have access to really interesting and great data, but it's not always like fully covering the space of stuff that we care about. So we're often trying to do things like extrapolate. Domain expertise plays a critical role. We often know a lot about the domains that we're trying to model. Sometimes that information comes in the form of scientific equations, physics equations, things like that. Other times it's more like, yeah, I've kind of got this rough sense that the solution looks kind of like this. We have a variety of different types of deployed environments. So sometimes, we play a role in developing new sensors, remote sensors, right? So anything from like a satellite all the way down to, I've got this thing that's going to measure seismic waves and it's going to do analysis online, and I'm going to stick it out in the middle of the desert, and it's not going to be very easy to reach, and it's got to run on a battery, and it's only, it can only be so big. Those sorts of things, right? And that has a big impact on the types of solutions that are even available to us. Decisions might be made under time pressure, and there's often adversarial issues, right? And that's just the nature of the type of work that we do. Broadly speaking, there are two classes of mission drivers. So one is scientific modeling. Those are cases in which we have like all these great physics equations, often exquisite models that we can use to build our AI-based models. The other one is sensor-driven use cases. Frequently, we can know a lot about the sensor, but not very much about the thing we are trying to sense. And so that data has a very different characteristic from the scientific modeling case. Okay, so this slide tries to sort of give you an idea of what kinds of mission problems we look at and the kinds of the characteristics of those problems. I'm not going to go down through this whole list. There's really 2 points that I want to make here. One is that the range of problems is very broad, right? So sometimes we're looking at sensor data, trying to find interesting patterns in them. Sometimes we're looking at, we're looking for patterns of human behavior. Sometimes we're looking at patterns of physical behavior. So things like how do, hunks of metal that have been sitting in storage for the last 50 years age over time. Sometimes we're looking at physics-based data. So we have these really great models, but maybe we need to create surrogates for them because they take too long to evaluate. Sometimes we're looking at cyber network data. Sometimes, the list just kind of goes on. So A, there's a broad class of problems that we're trying to look at. B is that there's a lot of overlap in the types of problems and in the characteristics of those problems. So like I said before, limited data is one of those characteristics that shows up a lot. The need to protect against adversaries, that's another one that shows up quite frequently. Being able to fuse data from multiple sources so that we can draw conclusions about complex patterns that are hard to pull out just by looking at it, that's another one that comes up. And again, the list kind of goes on. As a research program, right, we tend to try to focus on the problems that show up over and over again. We want to get the most bang for the buck out of that work. Okay. So there's a few important definitions that I want to touch on a little bit here. So starting from the bottom, when we talk about AI-based models, one of the things that we care about is sort of their credibility. And one way to think about this is the correctness of the model itself, right? So have we developed a model for the right thing, which can be harder than you might think it is? Have we verified and validated the context of that model? Have we shown that it performs well given the, given the scope of questions that we might want to ask that model? Have we shown that it performs well in that scope? Have we quantified its uncertainty? Do we know, right, if I have my model make a prediction, can I say something about how sure I am about the quality of the prediction of that particular prediction? So that's looking at sort of the correctness of the model. Trustworthiness is really about other objective measures that we can look at. So we can look at the data properties. What kind of coverage do we have of that data? Are there biases in the data, and have we addressed them appropriately? We can look at the kinds of domain information that we have available, and we can look at whether or not the model produces interpretable or explainable outputs where appropriate, right? None of these necessarily apply to every single model that we might construct, but most of them show up most of the time. And then finally, there's this notion of trust, right? This is a relationship between the AI-based system and a decision maker. So if you think of the AI-based system plus, a human who's using that system, decision maker, as a joint system whose performance we want to maximize, right? Trust is part of that equation. The human has to rely on it. And I can have the best system in the world. If the human's not willing to use its output or rely on it when it's appropriate, then that's not helpful. Likewise, I can have a really bad system, but if the human is willing to rely on it, that's not a good outcome either, right? So we have to sort of calibrate and set up a system of appropriate trust and use. So again, the key points to think about here are, in the context of the types of problems that we see in the national labs, right? What we're trying to do is figure out how do we go about establishing the credibility of our models? How do we go about establishing the trustworthiness of our models? And how do we go about ensuring that the relationship between the model and the person who's using it is trusted to the correct degree. Okay, so that kind of sketches out the problem that we're trying to address. Now I want to start talking about the steps that we've been taking to address that problem. And again, it's really worth understanding. I can't emphasize enough that this is very far from a solved problem. And what you'll see as we kind of go through here is that, yes, there remain a large number of gaps, and there's reason to believe that we can get to a point where we have these trusted AI systems that people can rely on in situations where there are large consequences to making really bad decisions. So kind of that there's hope for the future, right? Okay. So down on the bottom of this slide, what you're seeing is a generic sort of data-driven analytic pipeline, right? So I've got my training data. I'm going to pump it through a learning algorithm. I may inject domain expertise into that learning algorithm so that I can get a model. And now that model, I'm going to use it to make inferences about test cases. That's going to give me some outputs. And then those outputs are made available to a person who is going to sort of interpret them and make decisions and take actions based on those. And what we can do is try to take a look at each step in that process and figure out what can we do to sort of ensure that we've done a good job in developing the model and ensure that we're interpreting the outputs of that model appropriately. So we can look at the training data, right? We can look at the coverage of the data. We can test to see when our test cases are actually nowhere near the training data that we had, or if they are actually quite close. The point being that we can develop metrics to better understand the data that we have available in the context of the test cases relative to the training data. Right, and so this is one of the areas that we've been working on, trying to come up with these metrics so that we can better understand this. We can also look at the computational and the representational efficiency of the model, right? So how can I use the domain expertise to improve the quality and the correctness of the underlying model so that when I run my machine learning algorithm, the thing that I get back, right, is efficiently using the data to extract as much information as possible. Again, there are things that we can do to better understand how domain expertise is injected into the model. There are things that we can do to ensure that the structure of the model reflects the underlying properties of the domain. Again, I'm gonna walk through some of the projects that we've funded based on these topics, and so this is just kind of a high-level sketch to understand the scope of what we're trying to do. So now we've got this thing called scientific machine learning. Some parts of the literature call it physics-informed machine learning. I think there's some other names that people use for this, but this is basically the idea of having specialized models and algorithms that we apply in a scientific context. So if I have mathematical equations that describe my domain, there's actually a lot that I can do to correctly structure my machine learning based model and to improve the quality of the fit between the data and the model. Explainability, I guess there was a little something lost in translation there on the slide. Explainability is a popular topic, right? And it's something that happens right now. I've got my model, I'm making inferences, and I'd like to understand why a particular inference was made. Sometimes this is called interpretability. Again, part of what we're doing is trying to understand the context and the times that explainability actually helps people to make better decisions and what constitutes a good explanation, right? So I've seen huge numbers of papers in the AI literature that basically take as a premise, if we could explain the predictions that our models make, then we'd have a trustworthy model. That's not necessarily true. It's not false, it's just something that we have to evaluate, and we need to better understand the context in which that's true and which that's false, and we need to know what constitutes a good explanation. Uncertainty analysis, this is where I spent some of my career working. So this is looking at, there's uncertainty in predictions that comes from the data itself, right? The data itself has some noise associated with it. There's uncertainty that comes from the model, right? To what degree did I select the best possible model? And to what degree does changing that underlying model form around change the kinds of predictions that I get? Some of the inference procedures that you might use for certain types of models have a random component to it. So all of that piles uncertainty into the prediction that comes out. And the more that we can understand that in particular cases, the better we can interpret the predictions that the model makes, at least if you have a feel for uncertainty, right? If you have a little bit of statistics familiarity. And we're going to get to the importance of that part. Right, so now I've got my outputs from the model. Maybe I have information about the uncertainty in the predictions. Maybe I have information about explainability. Maybe I have some insight into the domain expertise that was provided to the model. All of that goes into how a human decision maker is going to use this model to make predictions. That's really important because I want my user to rely on my model, and I don't want them to over-rely on it. And so as we're going to see in some of the projects that we take a look at, there are a lot of things that affect how people make decisions, and they're not always obvious. And so this is another area that we're looking at. So tensor analytics is a particular approach to analyzing data. I'm not going to say too much about that here. There is a project that I'll talk a little bit about in just a moment. Other than to say, because we've been able to develop some insight into how they work and under what conditions they work, they're a useful tool that we've been developing at the labs. Counter-adversarial machine learning looks at this entire process and asks the question, like, what are the security concerns associated with it? Can an adversary extract information about the data that I use to train the model? Can it cause me to misuse the model in some way, or can they directly misuse the model in some way for some undesirable purpose, right? So securing the model against sort of outside influence, especially the kinds of influence that we didn't really intend when we built the model, is very important. So bottom line here, right? This process that I'm describing, right? What we're trying to get at is a certification process. As we build our models, what are the steps that we can take along the way so that when the model is complete, we can say, yes, this model is trustworthy to the best of our ability, right? It's not a guarantee that the model is always going to work under all conditions all the time. It's just that we have done our best to create a model that can be used by human end users, will provide the kinds of outputs that we expect, will perform in a reliable and predictable way. All of this is from the model developer's perspective, because that's the place where we live in the national labs. Now, other places in the government, like NIST, are developing their own set of methods, and we're contributing to that, but developing their own set of methods, frequently for looking at models after they've been constructed, right? So if someone hands you a model and says, is this model reliable? There are things that you can do to evaluate that, and some of the techniques that we've been looking at are also useful for that purpose, but that's not the same as evaluating it along the way as you construct the model. What I'm talking about here is focused on that forward-looking model developer's perspective. Okay, so all I wanted to do with this slide is give you a little bit of sense of the sort of scope of the investments that we've made in this area. So you can kind of see we funded about 36 projects. They're distributed. The capabilities that are listed on the left-hand side are the same ones that I just talked through on the previous slide. There are different maturity levels, right? Some of these things we are actively applying into mission contexts. Others are at a very foundational level, right? We're still really trying to understand how you measure the coverage of your data for a particular purpose and how you determine whether or not and to what degree you're extrapolating. Again, this is just to kind of give you a scope of the size of the effort that we've put into it, right? And it's not huge, right? This isn't like, hundreds of millions of dollars. Okay. So I want to kind of walk you through and give you a sense of what we've been doing by looking at some sample projects. I'm not going to go deep into the weeds on any of these. I'm just trying to give you a sense of where we've put our investments and how it sort of speaks to that process that I described 2 slides ago. Okay, so in the scientific machine learning area, again, this is about developing models that reflect an underlying known physics, an underlying set of known mathematical forms. One of the issues that comes up when we do this is that the form of the model, the mathematical form of the machine learning model that we're constructing is not exactly the same as the physics, the underlying physics that we know. And it can't be. And so the challenge becomes, how do I evaluate whether or not the model form that I'm using is appropriate to the problem that I'm trying to solve, to the system that I'm trying to simulate? So in this project, they looked at something called universal differential equations, and the reason for this was that it provided sort of an online way during development, which is exactly the context that we're looking at. You can kind of evaluate these equations and get a feel for whether or not the system fits the data that we have available, and to identify cases in which it doesn't and to make corrections into that model form. So again, this is a very tiny little piece of the whole scope that I talked about a few slides ago. But it's one way that we can address the kinds of questions about, is this model trustworthy up front? And we can say, yes, we took this step. We tried to align the model form that we used for our scientific machine learning problem to the data that we have available. On the right-hand side, so this is more of an application, but it illustrates a number of things that we can do to make sure that the models that we develop fit the data that we have. So here, the project is focused on material science. So what they're trying to do is, I'm trying to create a model that shows me the performance of a particular type of material for a variety of different conditions, right? So if, say it's some kind of a foam, well, I have things that control sort of the porosity and the rigidity and other things of that particular material. I want to know how, for a variety of different combinations of those parameters, that material is going to perform. Because I can't just experiment with every possible combination. That would cost a fortune and would take forever. So we're trying to make predictions. And one of the insights that this project had is that it's not just about understanding the error in a prediction. It's partly about understanding the uncertainty in that prediction, and that we can use uncertainty to help us guide our experimental choices as much as we use error. And they came up with a reinforcement learning based way to walk through the space and identify which experiments should we run, which ones provide the most information, and which ones will help us best identify candidate parameter sets for the material that we're trying to target. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about data and how we use data and domain theories to support. So on the left-hand side, this project called Probabilistic Error Bounds for Low-Rank Tensor Decompositions. Now, tensors are it's almost not correct to call them machine learning or AI. They're really a mix of linear algebra and statistics. The problem, the reason that we focus on them here is that they have some very interesting properties. A, they're very useful for data that is sparse, data for which we don't have very many good insights into what's actually in the data, what types of patterns we're expecting. And they also have, and we're in the process of developing, which is what this project is doing, error bounds. So we can say, what's the best that we can do in modeling this data, and how close to that are we getting? This project was able to show that A, the best is actually better than we originally thought, and B, we can get pretty close to the best, and we can show how far off the best we actually are. So that's a very useful set of properties for a set of data modeling techniques, right? And that's not something that comes with every set of machine learning algorithms that are out there. So trust enhancing probabilistic transfer. Now this project is looking at how do we leverage information that we already have, whether from another model or from some other source of data, to improve the quality of the model in a particular domain. So we have some domain that we're targeting. We're trying to construct a model. We want to pull in data from other domains because maybe we don't have a whole lot of data in the target domain. We want to pull in data from other domains to try to support and improve that model. One of the challenges with this is called transfer learning. One of the challenges with this is that frequently transfer methods try to transfer everything. And the side effect of that is that some parts of the source domain don't actually apply to the target domain. And so this project is looking at how do we probabilistically transfer information so that we're only getting the parts that are actually helpful and we're leaving out the parts that are not so helpful. Again, this is all about improving the quality of the model and improving the quality of the data early in the model construction process. In the security realm, so there's a couple of different, these are actually quite different takes on security. On the left-hand side, the multi-party computation for machine learning is looking at if I have a network of sensors and sensors that can do their own computation, right? So maybe I have a handful of drones that are flying around, they're collecting data. They need to broadcast that data to each other in order to compute an overall whatever it is they're trying to do, right? If they're trying to detect something, they need to share information among each other in order to determine the location and the numbers of whatever things it is they're trying to detect. The problem with that is when you do that data sharing, right, you're exposing it to everyone else. You don't want to make that data basically free to your adversaries to just kind of collect and see what you're seeing and those sorts of things. What this project did was leverage some techniques called multi-party computation, adapt them to a machine learning framework so that the drones could, for example, share that data, compute their solutions without actually exposing the data to anyone who wasn't a part of their network. And in fact, even if an adversary captured one of those drones, right, the drones would be able to detect that and shut off the one that was captured and still not expose the data to the outside. Now, this all comes at the cost of a lot of extra computation, but it's at least a proof of concept that you can be secure even in a highly networked environment in terms of sharing data. This other one, monitoring online adversarial tampering, was a look at how do we know when someone is trying to attack our a model, right? So maybe they're trying to exfiltrate data from that model, or maybe they're trying to use that model in a way that it was not intended to be used. It turns out that in this project, they were able to find a unified way to detect a variety of different types of attacks, which is very useful because you don't want, the effort to protect your model to suddenly become the most expensive thing that you do as a part of running your machine learning model. And so they were able to construct this framework that allowed them to sort of look for attacks, detect them, and to figure out how to respond to them without actually, without huge amounts of computation and in an effective way. Again, each of these is attacking just a very small piece of that trusted AI certification process that I was talking about. But as you can see, one piece at a time, we're putting those pieces into place. Now I want to talk a little bit about decision making. So one of the studies that Sandia conducted, one of the projects, looked at the impact of the model's predictions on human decision making. And one of the things that they found is that, a couple of things, right? One is that imperfect models, models that make mistakes, can still be very helpful to an end user. However, there are a variety of issues that can crop up along the way. One thing that they found was that sometimes users overtrust high-performing models. So if I have a machine learning model that doesn't make very many mistakes, it's not uncommon for the user to be like, oh, well, it's perfect almost all the time, and so I'm just going to always go with what the model says. When in fact, if they had paid a little more attention, they might have actually been able to correct some of those mistakes. Another thing is that the types of model errors interact with the user's performance. So if I have a user who is really good at detecting false positives, right? So I'm looking for these nuclear reactors in imagery. That's the example on the slide here. Maybe my user is really good at looking at one that's not correct and saying, no, that's not right. However, maybe they're not so good at flipping through huge numbers of images and detecting ones that were missed, right? That's a much harder problem in this context. So the implication is that I might want to actually train my model and trade off a large number of false positives for a small number of false negatives. In other words, I want to optimize the user/system performance as opposed to just the system performance. We don't often think about it that way from a machine learning perspective, but sometimes that might be the right thing to do. Of course, there are more issues, more details, more nuances that go with this. But it gives us a way to start thinking about, like, how do we design, what's the right error metric for some of these systems? It's not necessarily the highest possible accuracy. On the right-hand side, optimizing machine learning decisions with prediction uncertainty. This one took a look at, what if I wanted to do a formal decision, mathematical decision process, right? So there's this field called decision science. They have well-established methods for using probabilistic models to make optimal decisions. The challenge that we found when we started incorporating machine learning into decision science techniques was that machine learning models are not equally calibrated everywhere, right? And that's an assumption that decision science models tend to take. And so now it opens up this question, well, what do I do? What if I have a point-by-point uncertainty quantification? What if I know the uncertainty associated with each and every prediction that the model makes? Well, it turns out there are a lot of things that we can do to improve the quality mathematically of decision-making that we do in the context of our machine learning models. Part of this is recognizing that prediction and decision-making are two separate things, right? Prediction is what the model does, and it's based only on the data. Decision-making incorporates, yes, it incorporates the prediction, but it also pulls on things like costs and risks associated with making mistakes. That's something that humans tend to do sort of naturally, but it's not typically built into our machine learning models. And in fact, in this project, they were able to show even models called cost-sensitive machine learning that try to explicitly take into account costs and risks. If you use a decision science-based approach and you leverage things like uncertainty quantification, you can actually do better than traditional cost-based machine learning. Okay, so last one. This is about the human side of the interaction. I talked previously a little bit about the decision-making part. This is about how humans leverage and use information. So on the left-hand side, specificity in visualizations of state uncertainty, this project was looking at what happens when I show the user uncertainty information. One of the things that they found out was that depending on how you literally render, how you draw the uncertainty on the screen, can influence how people make decisions. In other words, I can change someone's risk tolerance level based on how I draw the uncertainty. This was sort of an unexpected result, I think, and it has huge impact on how we interface the trustworthiness information that we provide about our algorithms to the people who are using them to make decisions. So again, there's a lot of nuance sitting underneath this, half slide little summary, but the key point is that, you're not done once you sort of convince yourself that the algorithm and the model are objectively good. There's a whole other set of steps to understanding and using these things correctly and appropriately. And then finally, this last project, Tailoring for Appropriate Trust, sort of takes that previous one and expands it. So the idea is that there are a number of knobs that we can turn. It could be the quality of the model, the accuracy. It could be the interpretability of the model. It could be the kinds of uncertainty information that we show. It could be showing provenance of information, like where the underlying data came from, or which data points associate with certain decisions that were made. It could be sort of the level of expressiveness or how we view the predictions that make that get made by the model. It could be the level of interaction between the user and the model. All of these things are knobs that we can turn. And there's a risk, and there's there's sort of a payoff associated with doing this. On the payoff side, if we calibrate these things really well, we can get people to better understand what the model is doing, to better understand how to use the model to make decisions, and to overall improve the quality of the decisions that they make. The risk associated with this is that it's possible to manipulate trust directly, right? And in practice, we are not trying to manipulate trust. What we're trying to do is manipulate system plus user performance, right? We want to maximize that. I can trick the user into trusting my system, which is a really bad idea, but it's sadly not terribly difficult to do. So all of these lessons, right, that came out of all these different projects and the host of projects that I didn't really have time to talk about, feed back into this effort to develop a certification process, right? What we're trying to do is to understand not just the models themselves, but the process of building the model so that we can rely on them in a variety of different application contexts and situations. And so that the people who are going to use these models, who may not be computer scientists, may have very little background in statistics, may have very little knowledge about how, data analytics work, can still use these systems to make decisions and still be relied on to get good quality decisions out of them. Again, these are all one little piece at a time. So where are we trying to get to wrap up? So in the next fiscal year, and the proposals for these projects are being written as we speak. What we're asking our staff to do is to develop a preliminary trusted AI certification process. Pull together as many of these, as many of the projects, again, the ones that I talked about and the ones that I didn't get to talk about, pull together as many of them as possible. Pull together as many of the insights that we've developed along the way. And try to come up with a process for determining whether or not we built a good model. And then demonstrate it on a publishable mission relevant problem, right? So pick a problem that doesn't have sensitivities associated with it, but certainly looks like the kinds of problems that we solve at the labs every day. We want to be able to essentially come back. I'd like to come back here in a couple of years and be able to say, here's an example of a trusted AI certification process. Here's how we at Sandia certify our models. Here's how we decide whether or not they're any good. And show you how that works, and ideally get feedback from people like you so that we can continue revising and improving this process, right? I have no expectation that even in the next 5 years, we're going to convince ourselves that we've totally got this figured out, right? That's just not how this works. This is a huge space. There's lots of room for innovation here. And again, we're not trying to do this in a vacuum, right? So NIST, as I said earlier, is developing is working with a lot of different institutions, trying to develop a variety of definitions about what trusted AI means, about what reliability means, about what security means, right? We're just one of the places that's working on this problem. We have a different perspective. We're looking at it specifically from a model developer's perspective, whereas NIST might be looking more from, here's a model, can you evaluate whether or not it's any good? The DOE AITO office, AI Technology Office, has also been doing some work in this area. So obviously we're working with them since we're a Department of Energy lab. Again, the goal is to pull in as much outside information as possible from academia, from industry, from other parts of the government, and try to show what a trusted AI system looks like and define what that means. And that is the end. And if there are any questions online or in-house, I'm happy to take them. Yeah, go ahead and start.
In the context of what the work is going on at Sandia and our needs and our mission, and the broader efforts, like say by the White House, they've got kind of a security and strategy thing. Could you maybe draw some lines and parallel to that just to see how they align?
Okay, so the question was, for those of you online who might not have been able to hear, can I draw some connections between some of the other efforts that are going on? You mentioned explicitly the White House, and so what the White House is doing is trying to coordinate among a lot of different efforts. And my sense is that we're very early in the process right now. So NIST is really at the center of the government's effort to coordinate on this. My general sense of where they are right now is that they are still at the information gathering stage. Like, Sandia is one national lab. They're reaching out to the other national labs to try to understand what they've done so far. They're reaching out to academia and to industry. I don't know that I've seen anything that looks like a consensus on really any topic here. It's very early days, right? The AI executive order came out not even a year ago. I think it's probably closer to, if I'm remembering correctly, it's closer to 6 months ago.
Yeah.
So, as a national lab, certainly we've been interacting with the other national labs. So, Sandia, as a weapons engineering lab, we've talked the most with places like Los Alamos and Lawrence Livermore, They have similar perspectives to us, but again, slightly different. They work on slightly different problems from us. I don't know that anybody's really far enough along to have a big picture view of what this is going to look like in the future. And so right now, the best way to think about this is just, a million arrows pointing in, and there's this hodgepodge in the center, and it's going to take a while to really sort it out. Any questions from online? Not yet? Okay.
I want to thank him, and I can't seem to figure out how to.
Just hit the button, the microphone on the table.
A little technical difficulty. Hold on.
This one. I'm so sorry, y'all. You would think that I would know by now how to do this. David, thank you very much for coming and giving this talk. It was very interesting. We appreciate everything that Sandia National Laboratories does with Purdue University. You guys are a fabulous partner. And I want to wish everybody a fabulous summer and good luck on their exams. And we will see y'all in the fall. Thank you very much.
All right. Great to be here. Thank you.
Thank you.